recall correctly, Grace and I actually came and did a BGR thing for X-Ray like in 2009 or something, a long, long time ago, if you were there. If you married and took our advice from that, I'm sorry. But yes, for church, I grew up with rich Hong Kong people up in Linfield. That was my home church. And then it's sort of that's what I grew up with. But last year, I had the privilege of speaking at the Hebron Alliance, their English camp. So hanging out with Westie Asians like my wife. But that's like not really me. And so I feel a certain privilege to speak with you guys here in the South. So a lot of my relatives around Hurstville, actually. So my sister, one of my sisters live in Peakhurst, and my other sister lives in she spent the last 15 years in Rockdale Plaza, in one of the apartments at the top. But last year, she went a bit fancy and moved to Monterey on the Grand Parade. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time on the South Side, despite never really living here. And so when I went to uni at UNSW, I had a bunch of friends who went to like Sydney Tech and St. George. And so they were good friends of mine. Like I felt like they were my people, even though I didn't live anywhere near there. And so, I feel like this is relatable to me being on the South Side. Anyway, speaking of my people, some of you might know Bill and Ingrid. So they're actually at our church up in Brisbane. So they say hello. If you didn't know, they've got a new dog, border collie, who's called Wombat. I think Ingrid came up with that name. And he's super friendly, and they are very, very happy with their dog. And so we have very nice hot pot at their place. I'm sure you guys might remember having it with them. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing. You mentioned you probably recognize me, yet not really recognize me from some sermon videos. And so I'm praying that has been helpful for you guys to think counterculturally in a time where we live with hustle and we expect to hustle, but maybe we can live differently. And so today we're thinking about how does transformation happen in our lives? So changing direction a little bit. And so we've got a scene here in Matthew. And as many scenes in the Gospels begin, Jesus is confronted by Pharisees and teachers of the law, the scribes. And they challenge Jesus about his disciples. And they say, hey, your disciples aren't washing before they eat, right? There's a ceremonial washing they're meant to do. And so there's this, I guess, an invisible affliction known as uncleanness to the people of Israel. And so what happens if something's unclean and you touch it, you become unclean as well. So if you touch it with your hands, then you're unclean. And so, but you don't know because you can't see if something's clean or unclean. And if you touch something else, that also becomes unclean. And so there's this invisible affliction that exists that no one really knows because you can't see it, right? And so what they're meant to do is before they eat with their hands, right? If they eat with unclean hands, then the inside becomes unclean because the food they're touching is unclean, right? So they wash ceremonially so they become clean so they can eat and be clean, right? So that's the idea behind this tradition. But their question reveals what their real concern is, because they say, why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They didn't say, why do your disciples risk becoming unclean? That's not really their concern. It's they're breaking the tradition of the elders. And so Jesus kind of pulls the reverse, on them. He says, well, why do you break the commandments, right? Because of your tradition. So he gives this example about their parents, right? And so there's this special gift you can offer according to the tradition of the elders, that you could offer money to the temple. And so what they did was like, well, if you're going to offer money to the temple, God's more important than your parents, even though your parents are very important. And so people, instead of giving money to their parents who might be in need, they say, oh, but I dedicated this money to the temple and God comes first, right? And so we don't need to obey the command to honor our parents. I can just offer the money to the temple. And so it might be if you live at home and you're working, for example, and you say, oh, but at church, I need to give money to offering. And I give my money to offering and I don't have enough money to live. So I would have given this money as boarding to you. But, like you guys teach me, God's got to come first. So I can't give you the money. I got to give it to the church, right? And so they circumvent God's command with their rules, right? Their traditions. And so Jesus is very scathing in his assessment of them. He calls them hypocrites, right? You're avoiding one of the 10 commandments in order to follow your tradition. The traditions can be good, but you're using it as an escape clause against following. And so he quotes Isaiah, who says that these people, the people of Israel, they honor God with their lips and with their outward actions, but their hearts are far from God, right? So they're just doing the stuff, but inside they're actually unclean. And so they seem to be concerned about becoming unclean, but God and Jesus saying, no, you're already unclean on the inside. Like doing the stuff on the external doesn't matter, right? And so they're more concerned about the external things instead of the internal things. And so that's the basic point of the story. Now, if you've been in church a while, you've probably heard that story. You kind of know what that means. Right? Inside stuff that matters. But I think there's a disconnect between that truth that we know in this passage that seems quite straightforward versus what we practice, right? So you might be here as a Christian and you realize, okay, there is a sin that you are struggling with, right? And so you think, okay, how are ways that I can not do it? That's what we think about. Or a friend, right? A trusted Christian friend says, hey, I'm really struggling with this particular sin. And you immediately think, okay, so what can we do to help you stop physically doing it, right? Which is, in a sense, different to what Jesus is teaching us in this passage. So maybe you're a person who struggles with anger and say, okay, let's think about how we can, before you get angry, like take a deep breath or, find ways to stop ourselves doing it, right? Maybe you struggle with lust and think, okay, what are ways we can keep this person accountable or, do stuff with the computer to, and so we're just trying to focus on the external things, which actually Jesus is saying we're not meant to focus on the external things, right? And so we might see some wins. We see some things that are like, okay, yeah, it's different now. I'm doing whatever the sin is less, right? But it's like the Pharisees. It's just following an external thing. It doesn't really get to the heart of what sin is about, right? And so we realize, okay, yes, it's not enough just to change our actions. We should change our mind, right? Our mind needs to be renewed. We think about Romans 12:2, which says, be transformed by the renewing of mind. That's how we would experience transformation, right? Not just external things, but something on the inside, right? You can't sin if you don't think about sin, right? So instead of focusing on right actions, we try and have the right thoughts, spend more time reading the Bible, so we think about the Bible more, right? Or you might try some therapy, you might do CBT, and you sort of gaslight yourself into thinking the right thing, so you do the right thing, right? That would be a way to combat sin in life and experience transformation, right? And again, it kind of works, but, we don't always follow the logic of our mind, right? You might have a friend who is dating a person who has all these red flags, and you're like, okay, I have to tell this person, like, here are all the things that, like, you guys, you should run away quickly. And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah. And the next day, they're still together. And you're like, but I tried to explain to you, but sometimes logic doesn't convince us, right? Because our logic, our mind doesn't control us, actually. The Pharisees here, they use the logic, right? They use the logic of, well, if I offer this thing to the temple, I don't have to obey the command, right? So our logic isn't going to get us over the hill, right? And so we need something deeper than just fixing our external actions, something deeper than just fixing our thinking. And so we think about, okay, our will, we need to choose the right path. Jesus says, don't take the broad and narrow path, which looks easier. Choose the narrow path that might be harder, right? And so you've got to fight to choose that path. And so once you choose a path, then your mind creates the logic you need so that your body will do it, right? So you think about a person who is trying to diet, right? But like diet foods don't taste good. They're small portions, right? But a person who feels that this is what they want to do, then they will find ways to make themselves eat it. Like, okay, this has less calories. Okay, this is going to give me what I need. And so they convince themselves to eat it, even though it's not what they really, really want, right? But they will do it because they have a desire there to make it happen. And so they will. And so that's stronger than our intellect, like our mind. That's stronger than our external actions because it controls those other two things, right? But there's a problem there. So we might say, okay, here's the thing. I'm making this commitment to God and I'm going to deal with this sin, right? And it sometimes will work, but sometimes it won't. Because you think about if you were trying to be on a diet, right? KFC still smells good, right? Like ice cream is still like really creamy and your heart longs for those things, even though you've made a decision to be on a diet, right? And so, yes, if we make our will choose to be godly we will see some wins again, but the heart is what really matters, right? It's what we love, right? That's the thing that needs to change. What did Jesus say? What did the prophet Isaiah say in that passage? He says, these people honor God with their lips and with their actions, but here the problem is their hearts are far from God, right? The Pharisees are concerned with actions, right? Look at them not washing with their hands. They're concerned with logic. They're concerned with a will that is so bent on trying to obey God, they will do all of these traditions and commands to show their love for God, but their hearts are not there yet, right? And so we need to go a step deeper to our hearts, right? And so we can install filters on our computer. We can like read the Bible more. We can just say, yeah, I'm just going to not sin. Like hear a talk, I feel convicted. Yes, I'm just not going to do it. But that doesn't deal with our hearts, right? We need to go down to our hearts and experience transformation there. So when our hearts desire God, then our will is like, yes, so I'm going to choose this path. Then our minds go, okay, this is how we're going to make it work. And then our bodies obey us. Does that make sense? And so sin retreats into our hearts where it hides in like little caves. So it can't be found, right? And so we tend to stop. We think it's too hard to try and deal with it because it puts up the best defense inside our hearts. And so therefore we need to think sin is not primarily about doing the wrong thing or thinking of the wrong thing or choosing the wrong thing, but it's the desire of our heart. Our heart desires many things. It loves many things and it's disordered. And so what we're trying to do is how do we make Jesus, how do we make God our primary, our first love, so that all those other things, which are not bad, the things that we love, but they're just less important than God, right? But what we do, sin is about making good things more bigger than God things, right? So they're good, right? It's good to find, to want comfort, right? But comfort can become an idol when we say, well, I would rather be comfortable than serve sacrificially, which God calls us to do, right? And so when I cherish that more in my heart, then I will start to do things that would result in laziness, right? But if I just try and do more, right, it's not dealing with the heart. And so what I think happens is we actually trick ourselves then into thinking, well, I guess I've dealt with things in my heart over time because maybe many of you have been Christian for a while, particularly like if you kind of grew up in church and you went through like high school, uni, even working, even maybe getting married and moving on different life stages as Christian. You think, well, over time, surely I've dealt with sin. Like, how can I have not dealt with sin and still be a Christian 10 years later, right? But in some ways, we kind of have maybe tricked ourselves through this process. I want you to imagine something for a moment. I want you to imagine maybe you're like a mentor to someone in high school. Maybe you're a youth leader, or you were. And I want you to think about, okay, what do I want this teenage person who's trying to follow Jesus? What kind of things would I ask them, right, in terms of application, whether it's in a Bible study or just things that they should be aware of, right? And so we might say, all right, don't be obsessed with study. Okay, study is important, but bigger things in life, right? So that's what we tell them. Okay, careful how much time you spend gaming. Okay, gaming is okay, but restrict the amount of time you want to spend in games, right? Or when I was a teenager, okay, don't download MP3s on Napster or LimeWire. Okay, that's stealing, right? That's the things we would tell teenagers, right, at that phase in life. And so they grow up, they go to, say, university. Okay, so you're mentoring person in university. What kind of things would you tell that person who's at university? We might say, okay, don't be obsessed about your GPA. Okay, it's important, but it's not the ultimate thing. Okay, now you see, girls or boys. Okay, be careful who you get interested in and date, right? Those are things that we start talking to them about. Okay, you go to these parties. Okay, just don't get drunk, but you can hang out with your non-Christian friends there, right? Those are things we might warn them, talk to them about. So then they finish uni, and they say, okay, now don't get obsessed about your career. Okay, important to work, but not the most important thing. And then you say, okay, now you're earning a lot of money, so think about how you're gonna, manage your money and be faithful, right? Blah blah blah. Don't cheat your taxes, etc. Then that person, right, as you walk alongside them, they're working now, and maybe they have found someone, they get married, and they have kids. What would you tell them? You say, okay, well, now don't get obsessed with your family. Okay, they're also very important, but they're not the ultimate thing, right? And you'll say, careful how you manage your time, because you got to look after family and do your work and do church. Lots of things to juggle, right? And don't get angry with your kids. Okay, you got to be willing to be patient and kind with them, right? Those are the kind of things we would, right? Imagine, even if you're not that age, you kind of imagine those things happening, right? Now, let me give you 2 possible reasons why over time the things you told them changed. Okay, so option 1 is, okay, over time, if they're a follower of Jesus, and okay, as a high school student, they're learning, okay, how do I not prioritize study over everything else? Okay, so as they're doing their study and coming to church and going to youth group, they learn those things and reorder, okay, yeah, God is the most important, and these things are not as important. And so there's a little jostling that happens. But over time, they figure it out. They're not stealing MP3s. Okay, now they can go to uni. They've leveled up, and now they're at uni. Okay, now there are new challenges because they dealt with the old challenges. Oh, now the challenges are, how do I relate to someone of opposite gender and find someone to marry, right? Or whatever. How do I hang out with people and, not become of the world, right? And, okay, during uni, I guess they learned how to do that stuff. And now they've leveled up again, and now they can work and be Christians who work. And now they've got to learn how to manage money. And so they learn how to manage money, and maybe they have a family. So that's option 1. So they learn how to do these things over time. Or option 2 is, we don't really learn how to deal with those things, but we find more interesting things to be interested in. Does that make sense? So, okay, in high school, all I can think about, right, particularly in Asian background, was just make sure I study and do well. But then, and it probably went to like a single gender school, so I didn't meet any person from the opposite. But now I go to uni, oh my gosh, there's like lots of people, right? And so, who cares about study? Like, there are girls to chase, right? And then when I finish uni, like, oh my goodness, who cares about, I could find someone, but now I get money. And so I don't deal with the loves in my heart during that time. I'm just interested in another one. And so maybe you've been working for a while and you get good money, and it's like, well, I chased money, but I've got enough money now. So now what I want is a legacy. I want a family. And so we're not dealing with the pursuit of money in our heart. We're just changing to another love that's not Jesus. Does that make sense? So what do you think about? Do you think we generally do option 1, or do we do option 2? And I've been, leading Christians for the last 20 years. I feel like we're a bit more like option 2, right? But we kind of trick ourselves that, well, I don't struggle with this thing anymore. But what's really happening is I just love something else more, but it's not God, right? And so we our heart has many, there's an ordering, right? And so just we're like, oh, I don't try and focus on study anymore because I don't study, right? So that goes down, and then but now it's money, or now it's whatever it is, right? And so because of that, there's a problem because we've tricked ourselves to thinking, well, we deal with sin by dealing with the physical stuff, but that doesn't really deal with it. And we trick ourselves, oh yeah, but it's in the heart. And yeah, see, look, like I've changed, but we haven't really changed over that time. And so what we need to think about is maybe think of someone who might be like a recovering alcoholic. And so they might go from, heavy alcoholism to like 10 years being clean. Like, that's amazing work, right? But, some of those cases where either, someone, very kindly offers them a drink, like a wine with their steak or something. And they're like, oh, sure, why not? Like just one. Or, so a tragedy happens in their life and they don't know how to deal with it. And so they turn to drink. Like we've sort of heard stories like that, right? And so you might think in a Christian way, like, okay, we deal with a sin that happens in our life. But in some sense, the solution is not just to not have it anywhere near us anymore. Like it doesn't show that we've really dealt with it. I think someone who feels confident that they have dealt with, say, alcohol as a problem is they're able to casually drink but never indulge because they've been able to make it a servant, right? And so, for example, study. Yeah, maybe while we're at high school and uni and we really obsess over study, but now you're working, you just don't study. But what if you're into a master's program and then you go back to all your old habits, right? Would that happen to you? And so if that happens, then we haven't really dealt with, say, study, right? Whatever that delivers for us as being more, and instead of God being more valuable than that. And so what we need is our heart's desires to be reordered around Jesus. So how do we make Jesus the chief desire of our heart above all those other things that we might desire? Now, the answer is, the answer is not, okay? The answer is not, well, just love God more. Right? You just serve more, just read the Bible more, pray more, then God becomes more important, right? That's not the answer, okay? We've tried that before. And so the solution that comes to us is the gospel that Jesus offers to us, that we can't rely on our mind, our will, our body, or even our heart to just be more devoted to Jesus. Like we need a new heart. That's what the Old Testament prophet promises us. Jeremiah, Ezekiel says, God says through them, I'm going to give you a new heart. Right? And we see that in Jesus. Jesus comes to the earth, that he is the perfect human. His heart is fully devoted to God. And it's not that we just need to imitate it. We need to die, right? Jesus calls us to die to this life, this body, and this heart, and be resurrected into a new life that is in Christ, that somehow we will take on Jesus's heart. Not that we can undo it, we just have to be brought into a new one. And so we're called to die and to rise again into a new life with a new heart, right? And then from there, we're able to begin that process of transformation, not because we can generate it, but because God's Spirit lives in us. We're empowered by the gospel to change. Right? Otherwise, we just remain like the Pharisees and the scribes who are like, why don't you read the Bible more and pray every day, right? That's what we're meant to do. That is our tradition. Okay, look how you're failing at doing that, right? That's not the way to live, right? We need to find new hope in the gospel. Okay, so we get given a new heart as we commit ourselves to Jesus and we're in that new creation life. But it's not a quick fix. I don't suddenly do everything that I want in order to follow Jesus, right? It's still a struggle. We're still challenged by sin. So how do we then begin or continue that process of actual transformation of the heart now that we've got a new heart that's like Jesus, but we're still in this life and experiencing sin, right? How do we begin that slow process of transformation? Well, I think at least one answer to that is that we need the spiritual disciplines. We need Sabbath, we need silence, and we need solitude. Maybe you've heard us talk about that before. And so I lied. I said at the beginning we'll do something different, but yeah, we're coming back to this, like Thanos, right? It's inevitable. You must come back to this, right? And so I think Sabbath, silence, solitude help us do that transformative work of the heart that would lead to changed lives. Okay, so the question is like, how? How does that happen? And so we follow that same trajectory I talked about before. Okay, so what you think about is maybe think of a time where you externally sinned, or maybe think of a time where you were like emotionally very angry or very frustrated at a person or some kind of circumstance that happened in your life. Okay, and the question is, why? So why did you do that thing, or why did you get so angry or frustrated with that person, right? And then your mind will give its answer. Well, the reason is what? And then you say, okay, so why did you think that? And then our will respond and says, well, it's because this is a path that we're choosing. And then you say, okay, well, why are you choosing that path? And then finally the heart responds and says, well, it's because I really love X, Y, Z. All right, so let me give you an example of how that might work. So I mentioned I have a daughter, she's in grade 4. And there are times, get a bit frustrated. Maybe, so we try to set a time each day where she does homework, okay? Like 20 minutes of homework, not even a lot. Could be playing her guitar. It could be doing her homework, which is like on her iPad, like not even like Kumon maths, but like, cool math stuff. Right? And she's like, no, I don't want to do it. No. And so I will either over respond and I'll think of a punishment that far outweighs the problem. I'll get very angry. I'll get very frustrated. Right? That's what will happen, right? A lot of those times. So my question to myself is, okay, why are you so frustrated and angry, right? And so my mind tells me, okay, well, she needs to do homework so she can continue doing well at school, right? All right, and so, okay, why does she need to do well at school? And so my will is like, well, I want her to make something of her life. And one of the key parts is, developing disciplines and not being a super high achiever, but just doing as well as she can. That's all I want, right? I'm not a tiger parent, I think. I just want her to do well. And so part of that is doing homework, right? Do homework, at least be on par with everyone, if not, doing a bit well in some things. Okay. So now the question is, okay, so why do I want that for my daughter? Right? And this is where our heart has to respond, and often the heart responds in like 4 different ways, right? They talk about these things as like core idols. These are the core loves in our heart that often answer. And so it's either power, comfort, acceptance, or control, right? PCAC. I've just created a new alliance church, Panania Chinese Alliance Church, right? Or something like that. Right? Power, control, acceptance, comfort. So, for example, if power is the thing that is in my heart, and I say, well, she needs to do this because this is what I expect of her. I exert power as a father, right? And maybe I don't get to exert power anywhere else, but this is the one place I get to, and she's going to do it. Why? Because, right? I'm just in authority. I think this one maybe doesn't appeal as much to those of us Asian background because we always look at power and think it's a bit ugly, right? And so we often don't manifest that kind of one, but it happens, right? Second one is control. And so maybe it's the reason I feel this way is I want to control her destiny, right? Yeah, no, I'm not a parent who projects my ambitions onto my child. This is the way she should do it, right? Because this is the way it should work, right? I want a sense of control. And she's breaking the control, and therefore I'm very angry and frustrated because she's not doing what I really love, right? Having control in life. The third one, I think, is the doozy, is acceptance, right? So I think this is, for me, is I want her to do well in life. So people will look at me and say, oh, gee, isn't Pastor Chris a good dad? Because if she doesn't do well, my gosh, people look at me and say, what a poor father he is. Look at how poorly his daughter is doing. She's not as good as the other kids, the other pastors' kids. Oh, he must not be a good dad. That's how I might feel. That's what's the desire in my heart, that people would look at me and say, he is a good dad. How do I know that? Oh, because his daughter does her homework, right? I think that gets a lot of Asian people. And the last one is comfort, right? So maybe I think, well, if she's not doing well in life, that when it comes to my retirement, I want that to be a comfortable time where she will look after me and my wife. But if she's not, oh, I still got to look after myself, right? And so there's a sense of comfort. And so whatever one of those four things are, we value it so much that if someone doesn't abide by that desire, we feel angry, we feel frustrated at them because you're not doing what I really desire. And so whatever situation you're in, I think maybe we can find what that is. And so there may be the same presenting symptoms. Okay, my daughter is not doing what I'm asking, right? But the heart may be projecting different desires from that very same thing. So I talked to a different parent who has the same problem, but their heart has a different problem, right? So we can't just assume it's always the same. And so what we need to do is think about, how do I arrive at such a poignant diagnosis of my heart, right? That I realize it's about acceptance, right? It's not going to happen while we're sitting on the train, replying to emails for work as we travel to work. You're not going to think about that. So we need to rest, right? But if part of your rest is to just watch K-dramas or play computer, you're not going to think about that as well. So we need this sense of silence and solitude, breaking away from the world, right? Where we can sit down and think about, okay, what is actually happening in my life? All these things that I felt frustrated about today, why did I feel that way? So I need time to rest. I need time to experience silence and solitude so that I can process those thoughts, right? But if I live a life of hustle, I'm never going to realize what's happening in my heart. And so all these things, I'll try and change the external things, like, oh, okay, I keep getting angry at my daughter. Okay, I'll just not get angry at her, right? But it doesn't deal with my heart, right? And so we just keep running and running because we're in the hustle, never getting to those things. And so what we need to do is silence, solitude, Sabbath, right? And so some Christians have developed a tradition called the examen. And basically what they do is in the evening each day, they will finish the day. Before they go to sleep, they would examine their day and they think about, okay, did I get like angry today? Did I get frustrated? Like you just think, like, what was some weird things that happened today? And then that's when you do the process. We ask yourself, okay, well, why did that happen? And then your mind is like, okay, well, this is why. And then your will answers. And then finally you get to the heart. Your heart says, okay, the real reason is because I really want comfort or because I really want to be accepted. All right, that may not happen every single day. And you may not be able to do that work, but we need time to do the heart work to get down to the problem. Because what did Jesus say the problem was at the beginning, right? The passage is like, no, the external things are not what matters. It's the heart. But we keep focusing on the external things. And so therefore we need to fight, hustle so that we can experience transformation. Can I pray? Dear God, we thank you for your word in Matthew. And we thank you for the call to remind us that it's not the external things or even just the mind or our will, but it's our hearts that need to be devoted to you. And we thank you that in Jesus, we're given new hearts, an opportunity to be transformed by His Spirit. And so I pray that we would be able to move beyond just thinking about the external things, our mind, our will, but our hearts. And it will be difficult. There'll be emotional times where we're wrestling with our own heart. But I pray that as we do this, as we take time out from the hustle of life, that you would meet us in that moment and help us to experience transformation to be more like you. And we ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen.